it may not occur at any point of time. Then what is literature review? The literature review is the map, the field of study, and in this process helps the researcher to identify, among other issues, the research gap which is vital for his or her research. I mean, the previous research, or I mean, what the previous researcher want to tell about this work, or how my research will definitely vary from that previous work. I mean, for example, a literature review, what you should do is first here he should not just summarize but also review and evaluate previous publication and projects in the field. In the second, research should he or she should take not to omit or ignore major publication and research studies in that area. And thirdly, it has to critically summarize and evaluate previous research studies, and he or she should clearly select those how they are related to his or her studies now. Okay, that is literature review. Then moving to the next slide, what is research gap? Discovering something that has already been discovered, or discovering something that has already been published. Going and researching what are the field, what are the elements, and what are the concepts, what are the theories are used in a particular text, and how my thesis differ from all those, I mean, already done works. That is research gap. Is Then I talked about variable. Okay, what is a variable research? A variable is defined as that what assumes different values. For example, to find out if there is a change in a particular college first year UG students, this is an example created by me. So if you want to text, what is a variable? If you want to test a student, you are taking the first your UG students to an exposure to 30 minutes of every day, I mean a period of 6 months to BBC TV news. And in the research project, what you will do, who is an independent variable there? Independent variable is students, those people who are exposed to the environment. But what is a dependent variable? Dependent variable is that BBC news. I am making it dependent. I am dependent on the BBC news channel to make my people to fluent in English. Okay, so here the independent variable is the students, and the dependent variable is the thing, the material which I take to improve the quality of the students. That is what variable in research is. Yes. And then now we talk about reliability. I think even in the last 2024 also we got one question on the reliability in research. That is, reliability would imply that when two researcher attempts to repeat or replicate, I mean, like you can always connect this term with self-plagiarism or plagiarism. When two researchers, doing the same research in the same field with the same novels and the same ideas, that is called reliability in research. There are two types of reliability. One is internal and external reliability. The internal reliability focus on consistency, and the external reliability give importance to replicability. Okay, that is what reliability in research means. When two people are doing the research in the same thing, in the same novel, the same theorist and everything. Yes, ma'am. Then the next slide would be, what is a construct validity? It refers to the manner in which key concepts are defined. Concepts should be defined in such a way that there is practically no difference or variation in the way fellow researcher or examiners understand them. For example, if the title of the thesis is A Feminist Reading of the Novels of Anita Nair, the way the researcher defined the term feminist should be largely agreeable and acceptable by other researcher and examiners. Okay, I'm here, on reading the title, you will understand I am making a feminist study on Anita Nair. But if you go and read my thesis, entire thesis, I have not done justice to the word feminist, then that is called, the sequence will not have a connection to the title and the entire research. Then what is a thesis statement? A thesis statement is an articulation of the research project, preferably in a single sentence. Every thesis will have a thesis statement. As a researcher, the researcher, he or she should formulate the thesis statement after completing the literature survey and examining the primary text and some critical materials as well. When you will do the thesis statement is, you will collect materials. Okay, you will read the primary text, and you will also get some secondary sources. For example, see this thing. The thesis attempts a hermeneutical reading on the myth of Daedalus in James Joyce, A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man, with a view to finding out the hermeneutics of myth in general and the Joycean product of demythologization in A Portrait of an Artist as a Young Man. This is the thesis statement. Okay, how a thesis statement should look is this. Then moving to the writing and documentation, what you will do, the basic steps or research stages in research. The first stage would be identification of the research problem. Okay, when you take a research, you will first look for the problem. Then it is usually couched to the hypothesis. Will next step will move with the hypothesis. After identifying the research problem, one should undertake a literature survey. Then the literature survey enables the researcher to find whether the research proposition is original and helps the researcher to familiarize how the previous research is related to his research. Then moving to the second stage, the finalization of data collection. We'll collect all the materials first. Okay. Then from the collected materials, we will take some materials which are very related to us. We will not have like 20, we will not collect like 100 materials or 1000 materials for our research. We'll collect, but the next step will be we will take what the things we need. Okay, that is the second stage when it comes to documentation and writing. Moving to the final stages, analyzing the secondary sources and using it for our research. Yes. Moving to bibliography and works cited. What is the difference between bibliography and works cited is this. Bibliography comes from the Greek word biblio, meaning book. Bibliography is a list of books, articles, and web sources that a researcher has referred to. Okay, what is works cited? It is a list of only those books, articles, and web sources that the researcher has actually cited in the thesis. That is the difference between bibliography and works cited. Yes. So that we are using the term works cited there. Then, after all those things, these question will always have in mind. When I work on the author's text, should I discuss each text separately or discuss all the text holistically? For example, if you are going to do a PhD research, eh, definitely all the researcher. I wrote all those things in my notebook. Myself and my guide were discussing all those things. These are the doubts which I had. Okay, then how many chapters should my thesis contain? Then which chapter should I write first? Then what should be the introductory chapter contain? What should the last chapter contain? What should be the total number of pages? What should be the length of my thesis title? Okay, then what is the purpose of quotation? How many quotations can there be in a page? Can I alter quotations? Can I use my research publication in my thesis? Whether I will get a self plagiarism? Okay, then what should be the synopsis contain? Should there be an abstract to my thesis? Should I always mention the scope for further research in my thesis? And when do I start writing? Okay, how many draft do I make in a thesis before submitting? Then how do I revise my thesis? Okay, those draft thesis. Then what should be the style of my writing? How to avoid plagiarism? What is self plagiarism? And how do I use square brackets in documentation? And what are the common abbreviations used in a thesis? And while printing my thesis, should I go in for right justification? At the end, we will stop with the printing. For example, see, in the this last year, I mean 2024 last exam, there was this question: a manuscript having an overlap with earlier papers by the same author or by the same some of the present author is termed as plagiarism. Okay, then hypothesis made during or after the research work is over is known as null hypothesis. Okay, we are not going to do anything with the research. Then the property of research to replicate the same results using the same technique. For example, I told you those two researchers are doing the same research with the same novels with the same title, the same thing. We call it as reliability in research. Okay, that is what research and those things. this is notes from my personal thing. And so, what is a prose? Prose is an inclusive term for all discourses spoken or written which is not patterned into the lines, either metric verse or free verse. So we'll usually have some kind of rhythm when it comes to prose, but not like the poem. What is a prose poem? A short composition employing the rhythmic cadences and other devices of free verse, but printed wholly or partially in the format of prose. For example, the prose poem can this Spleen de Paris by Charles Baudelaire and Les Illuminations by Arthur Rimbaud are the best examples of prose poems. Okay, moving to the next slide. Okay, I've collected all those important prose works from early Tudor dynasty, and I completed. I think I've completed till George Orwell. Okay, so when it comes to Balthasar Castiglione's Il Cartegiano, where he discussed about the discussion of qualities of an ideal courtier, it is in the form of a conversation. Uh, um, I mean, I've quoted all the important prose works. Okay, then moving to Roger Ascham, he has written a work called The Schoolmaster. This is an English prose on the ideals of education. And moving to Thomas Eliot, the book named The Governor, he contributed to the ideal of the Renaissance gentleman, where he was. It is called as a commonplace book, okay, where he was talking about the ideal of the Renaissance gentleman. Then moving to Decidius Erasmus, The Praise of Folly. The title is a pun on the name Thomas More, but this is a prose satire on the corruption and ignorance of the clergy. Yes. John Skelton, who is a tutor to Henry VIII, is known for Skeltonic verse, irregular and satirical poetry. He has written a work called The Book of Philip Sparrow, where, where a girl compares her love for the dead sparrow with other kinds of love in the world. Then he has written this work, Colin Cloud. The character by name, Colin Cloud, gives his opinion on the state of church. Okay, moving to Sir Thomas More, and we know he has written a work, Utopia, an essay in two parts, first written in Latin in 1516 and translated by Ralph Robinson in 1551. Ralph Robinson is the son-in-law of Thomas More to English, and it was influenced by Amerigo Vespucci. The first book he talks about describes the oppressive injustices of England, and the second book he talks about uh, uh, he introduces the character Raphael Hithlode, by whom Moore claims to have met at a place called Antwerp. Then moving to the Shakespeare's contemporaries, where we have Philip Sidney. He published the work The Defense of Poesy, and in this work, The Defense of Poesy, he says poetry is a speaking picture and its end is to teach and delight. And he also made this definition: poetry is an art of imitation. Then antiquity of poetry, and he talks about these three things: antiquity of poetry, universality of poetry, and continuity of poetry. Okay, moving to George Puttenham, and George Puttenham has written this work, The Art of English Poesy, where he talked about again three things: poets and poetry. And though in the section poets and poetry, he talked about poets on lamentation, marriage, etc. And when it comes to proportion, he talks about metrics, pattern, and anagrams and devices used in the poems. And when it comes to ornament, he's talked about the figure of speech we used in a poem. Then moving to the next slide. Then moving to the Francis Bacon, and as we all know, he's a philosopher and essayist, and he advocated empiricism, a kind of sensory experience. He says when he was talking about empiricism, it is kind of sensory experience, the best source of knowledge. Then he has written this work, The Advancement of Learning, which is a track on education, and this thing he in this work, The Advancement of Learning, he says he discovers a new system of philosophic instruction based on empirical perception of nature. He is a scientist basically, and he was making everything to the references, everything to experiences. Then he wrote this work, Essays or Counsels, Civil and Moral. As we all know, in the first collection he has written, first collection is 1597, which has 10 essays, and 1612 with 38 essays, and in 1625 we have 58 essays. Then moving to the next slide, the other works of Bacon includes The New Atlantis. It accounts of the discovery by English sailors on an island called Ben-Salem in the Pacific Ocean. He talks about discovery by the English sailors. Okay. of an island called Bensalem in the Pacific Ocean. Then he introduces the ideal design for the College of the Sciences. In this work, The New Atlantis. Then he has written other works like De Spantia Veterum, which he written in Latin, and that got translated as The Wisdom of the Ancient in 1619. Then Sylvia Silverum, or Natural History, that was published posthumously in 1621, 1627. This work is Francis Bacon's A Book on Law. Then moving to the next slide, moving to the Jacobean period, we have these writers, Thomas Campion, and who's written this work, Observations in the Art of English Poesy, a critical tract attacking a rhyme, and Robert Burton, he wrote The Anatomy of Melancholy. He wrote under the pseudonym Democritus Junius. This was once asked in net, and it talks about two types of melancholy. This was again also a question in net. He talked about two types of melancholy. One is love melancholy, one is religious melancholy. Okay, moving to the next person, Joseph Hall, and his work is Characters of Virtues and Vices. He talked about sin and those things. Moving to John Earle, he has written this work, Microcosmography, or A Piece of the World Discovered in Essays and Characters, where he talked about manners of the time. Okay, that is prose in Jacobean period. Then moving to the next slide. Yes, ma'am. Next slide. Okay. Moving to Jeremy Taylor, and he's written this work, The Rules and Exercise of Holy Living and Holy Dying. And this is a devotional handbook on Christian practice meant to help Anglicans, okay, the Church of England. And the next work is A Discourse on the Liberty of Prophesying. That was in 1646. You don't want to worry about this work. And Discourse on the Nature, Offices, and Measures of Friendship. That was in the year 1657. Then moving to Isaac Walton, who has written this work, The Complete Angler. This work is a celebration of art and the spirit of fishing. Okay. Then moving to Thomas Hobbes, as we all know, Leviathan, or the matter, form, and the power of commonwealth, ecclesiastical and civil, published in the year 1651. And he argued for social contract and rule by an absolute sovereign. He says a rule should be made to make an absolute society, to make an absolute sovereign. And it is a most influential philosophical text without a uh, binding about social contract between a man and the state. Human life would be in disorder, he says. And he talks about theory of the body. Now we are talking about body theory. Okay, if you look for post-humanism, if you look for transhumanism, now we also talk about a concept called post-dualism, which is half human and half machine. And those things will get connected to a thing called disability studies, where we will talk about para-Olympics and Special Olympics and those things. People have so many instruments in their body. And even that time, Thomas Hobbes talks about theory of the body, where he was telling king has always two bodies. I mean, the ruler, the authority of the state will have two bodies. One is a natural body, a normal human being. Another one is a body politic, he says. Okay, the body politic in the sense the king will act as a king wherever he needs. And moving to the Restoration period, as we all know, John Dryden has written this work, an essay on dramatic poesy. And it is a discussion among four people on the river Thames, and it is Lycurgus, Eugenics, Lycidas, and Leander. Then he has written preface to fables. In this work, he compares Homer and Virgil and Ovid and Chaucer. Okay, in this famous work, he says, "Here is God's plenty." Then moving to John Locke, he has written a true treatise on government, an essay concerning human understanding, where he talked about inquiry into the origin and extent of man's knowledge, and he also rejected the doctrine of inborn ideas, where he talks about tabula rasa. He was rejecting the ideas of, doctrines of inborn ideas and knowledge, maintaining that the source of knowledge is experience. And this was written in the lucid form, this prose. Moving to the Augustan age, I'm just giving the overview. Okay, so that I think I'm giving the important points also. Moving to Alexander Pope, an essay on man. It is a verse essay in the manner of Horatian satire in 4 epistles, and all those epistles, letters were addressed to Henry Saint John of Viscount. Then he also talked about man's position in the great chain of being. And he also talked about the importance of self-knowledge in this essay, an essay on man. And his scathing attack on human pride to observe the limits of reason. And he talked about the relationship between society and the individual, and the necessity of virtue for true happiness. All those things he talked about. Then I think I told you he has written 4 epistles. The first epistle he was addressing it to Cobham, the second epistle to a lady, and third epistle to Bathurst, and 4 epistle to the Earl of Burlington. Then, and he has written this work, an epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot, and this epistle to Dr. Arbuthnot was also called Prologue to Satires, and it embodies the ideals of civilized friendship and good sense. Then moving to Daniel Defoe, we all know Daniel Defoe. We call him as a father of journalism. But when it comes to prose works alone, he's written this work, The Shortest Way with Dissenter. This work is a satire on Anglican Tories and Parliament. And moving to Jonathan Swift, he has written this work, The Battle of Books. It is a satire on dispute between the ancient and the modern writers. Then Drapier's Letters, Gulliver's Travel, as we know, is making fun of uh, I mean, he'll go to 4 places and he's making fun of French and English fight. Okay. Then moving to Dr. Johnson, he's written Lives of Poets, published in the year 1781. And in this work, Lives of Poet, he talked about 52 prefaces of English poets. And he has written the work Preface to Shakespeare, where he was talking about the merits and demerits of Shakespeare, and also how he used tragedy and comedy to make a tragicomedy. Then when it comes to romantic age, and well, definitely you should read, focus on Charles Lamb, the Essays of Elia. And we know Essays of Elia, where you will come across characters like Elia and the cousin. I mean, his sister Mary is treated them as cousin Bridget. Okay, South Sea House is the first essay. Then you'll come across so many essays, Chimney Sweepers, and those things. Moving to William Hazlitt, and he has written Characters of Shakespeare. Okay, Characters of Shakespeare's plays, and he talked about Imogen. He talked about uh, Desdemona and all those female characters. And moving to the round table, it is also an important essay. The lectures on English poets. He has given some so many. He has taken some many poets for this references. And moving to the table talk and the spirit of the age, we call it as zeitgeist. And moving to Thomas T. Quincy, he has written The Confession of an English Opium Eater, his account on his opium addiction. And on the knocking at the gate in Macbeth, it discusses Act 2 and Scene 3, the portrait scene in Macbeth. Then he has also written this work, The Revolt of Tartars and the English Mail Coach. And this English Mail Coach has 2 articles. The one is The Glory of Motion. I mean, the two division. The first is The Glory of Motion, and the other is The Vision of Sudden Death. Okay, that is the English Mail Coach. This was once asked in net. Moving to the Victorian age, we have John Henry Newman, and John Henry Newman has written this work, Tract for the Times. Okay, pamphlets written by the members of the Oxford movement. Those were the pamphlets. Okay, I mean, John Henry Newman is a member in the Oxford movement. Then Thomas Carlyle. Thomas Carlyle has written this work, The French Revolution, and Sartor Resartus on heroes and heroes worship and the heroic in history, where he was telling, using references to Shakespeare and Napoleon and calling them as heroes. And Past and Present, Shooting Niagara and After. And this work, Shooting Niagara and After, this was against the Great Reform Act of 1867. Then moving to John Ruskin, Unto His Last, and this work influenced Mahatma Gandhi a lot. And he was making a detailed plan to make the nation wealthy. And was talking about the in Seven Lamps of Architecture. He was talking about the Romanian architecture and modern painters. He was giving references to Raphael Brotherhoods, then the Stones of Venice, okay, and Sesame and Lilies. In Sesame and Lilies, we have 3 parts. One is of Queen's Garden, other one is of King's Treasuries, the third one is the Mystery of Life and its art. Okay, that Sesame and Lilies divided into 3 sections. Then moving to Matthew Arnold, and before I forget, in this work, Sesame and Lilies, he says Shakespeare has no heroes, only heroines. Then moving to Matthew Arnold has written this book, Culture and Anarchy, and where he discusses the dilemmas of English society. Moving to the next slide, coming to 20th century, we know all the works of Virginia Woolf and everything. So when it comes to Virginia Woolf, please go ahead with the Plumage Bill, where she was talking about banning the British feather imports to other countries. Then the Common Reader, it is a collection of essays. In this work, Virginia Woolf was quoting Dr. Samuel Johnson, even the first, uh, I mean, text, I mean, in the first chapter. Then the modern essay is a collection by Virginia Woolf, where she was reviewing the works of Ernest Rice. Okay, Ernest Rice Anthology of Poems. That is the modern essay by Virginia Woolf, and also in the modern essay, she was talking about, and she was distinguishing the materialist writers and the writers like James Joyce. Okay, then going to the next slide. When you are focusing on the prose writers, please go ahead with George Orwell, because George Orwell uh, has many, I not many, but one or two prose collections. Please go for E.M. Foster. When it comes to American writers, move for Edgar Allan Poe, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Henry David Thoreau. And I think these things will do for prose when it comes to that point of view. Yes, thank you.